Good morning, everybody. I know that it is a very hot day, full of appointments and two very crowded sessions in the fair. So thank you for everybody who managed to meet us today again. I am going to tell you a few words about the backstage of PAGODE. So next, please, Sophie. PAGODE is a project, one of the generic service projects funded by the European Commission in the Connecting European Facility Program, and it is about Chinese and China-related content in Europeana. It aims to highlight Chinese heritage as a part of Europe's cultural history of trade and exchange, and encourage better and different understanding of the relationships between East and West. The point is that the European cultural heritage institutions are full of Chinese heritage because of the exchanges, the trade and cultural exchanges that happened since several centuries between Europe and China, and because of the unfortunate stories that have seen the Europeans in China. So because of this complexity of the relationship between Europe and China, as it happened for the whole post-colonial stories, the European institutions are not fully ready to show this heritage, either because they are afraid of the provenance, or in the most fortunate cases, because there is no knowledge about this heritage. So the scope of PAGODE has been to put in a higher visibility a heritage that is wonderful, full of fantastic stories, but still unknown. Next, please. In figures, because you know that in the generic service projects of Europeana, figures are always very relevant, and for Europeana itself, we have to measure how we contribute to the success of our Europeana initiative, with more content, more quality, and more engagement. In PAGODE, we are aggregating 10,000 minimum, because we are doing more than these targets, newly digitized objects, annotating more than 2,000 digital objects that are already in Europeana. So not only the new digitized objects, but also objects that are already in Europeana but not qualified as Chinese heritage, and to improve through automatic enrichment more than 20,000 records that are again still in Europeana. Next, please. Well, we said digitization, annotation, and enrichment. Digitization, that we are delivering new contents in Europeana, and many of us know the generic service projects funded by the European Commission have a requirement, a mandatory requirement. New content should be provided to Europeana via digitization as Tier 4. Tier 4 means ready to be used and reused by everybody, free of rights. This is very important because to find 10,000 new digitized content from professional digital archives, it has been a real challenge. This is not the topic of the workshop today, but I would like to highlight that we needed a thorough digitization planning based on the nature of contents, because they are different one from the other. Some other digital representation of objects in museums, some others are photographs of cultural heritage repositories, others are photographs of photographers who traveled in the late 1800s, beginning of 1900, so early photography, and the others are contemporary photographies. So very different sources. And we had to base our planning on the actual capacity of each content provider, museums, digital archives, private collections, and so on, in order to produce high quality data and metadata. Second part, aggregation. Again, this is not a part of the workshop of today. We had other workshops in PAGODE, but the characteristic of the aggregation in PAGODE is that we used complementary paths, and this for aggregators, we are in the Aggregators Fair, in the Europeana Aggregators Fair, is a challenge, because each aggregator works differently, and we combined these aggregations. And we are very proud of the success of this combination. We used the thematic aggregator Photo Consortium. I'm the vice president of Photo Consortium, and I'm very honored of this role. But we used also national aggregators, because in some countries there are national policies that recommend the use of national aggregations. And so we combined the work of the thematic aggregation Photo Consortium with the technical support of the mapping and ingestion through national aggregators, in particular FINA for Finland, EKT in Greece, and the Dutch national aggregator. Next, please. The third, enrichment. Again, this is not exactly the focus of the workshop of today, but enrichment has been another challenge, because we wanted to combine two mechanisms of enrichment. One through crowdsourcing, and we reused the platform that was developed in the previous Cloud Heritage project. So there is a combination of relationship with the other generic service projects. You will hear in the presentation of Sophie about this combination of relationships with the other generic service activities. Crowdsourcing made with the students from the University of Ljubljana and the University of Leuven. Again, a combination of different experiences, and also students who didn't know each other and who went into a common job through PAGODE. Under the experience, the coordination of the Department of Asian Studies at Ljubljana. You will hear from Maya later on. And the annotation through natural language processing techniques provided by the experts coming from the National Technical University of Athens, who now established the Think Code company, and who delivered the services to Europeana for automatic enrichment. Next, please. All this works because we have a network behind. A network made of 7 partners, 7 associate content providers who contributed on the basis of very small grants that we provided in order to reimburse a little bit the huge effort made by the University of Leiden, the World Cultural Museum in Leiden, the Benaki Museum, the Museo Virasto, the Slovenian Museum of Ethnography in ethnology in Ljubljana, and probably I'm missing somebody. So a very huge network, but not only these 14 partners, associated and beneficiaries of the project, also all the other providers of Europeana who have in Europeana already published contents about Chinese heritage. And you will hear about this search through Europeana that made possible the compilation of the Europeana China Thematic Space. Next, please. On the 4th of April, the day of the Christian Easter, of the Catholic Easter, you know that I have been educated as a Protestant in Italy with a grandfather who was a minister, but I'm very ignorant about religion, so forgive my mistake. On the day of the Catholic Easter, on the 1st of April, we launched the Europeana China Thematic Space. This was another challenge for us because it was Sunday, a day of festivity for everybody. We launched the thematic space exactly on that day.
And
the thematic galleries, a blog post. Yeah.
Sorry to drop in, but
so
we chose.
Please,
sorry.
Sophie.
Yes, I wanted to add that we chose the date because it was Christian Easter or Catholic Easter together with Tomb Sweeping Day, which is one of the biggest Chinese holidays.
Okay, perfect. Sophie is now full of stories and celebrations to share with us. So you will be astonished about how rich is this heritage and how much we can do to improve our knowledge and our experiences of this heritage. Next, please. So was it possible? What you will see and what you are already able to see in the Europeana China Thematic Space because of a backstage work, the digitization, the aggregation, the enrichment, and in particular, two aspects that are the subject of the workshop of today, the semantic framework and the curation. And next, please, I give now the floor to my colleagues, Maja Vaselic from the University of Ljubljana, who will talk us about defining, creating, applying, refining the semantic background of the PAGODE Europeana China, and Sophie Thijs from PhotoConsortium and K11. I wanted to highlight your contribution to PhotoConsortium here. We know her very well, who will talk us from about the shift and the path from semantics to showcase with informed metadata, enrich the collection, and diligent curation. So the floor is yours, Maja, please.
Hello, everybody. Welcome also on my part. I would just first like to stress that this presentation was put together with my colleague Dunja Zorman, who is now very busy preparing everything for ingestion of one Slovenian batch of objects into Europeana, and that's why it's only me speaking to you today. As sinologists, we were tasked within this project primarily with setting up the semantic background or the semantic framework. And before we started, we imagined very naively, I must say, that this will be a sort of one-time job. So once we have finished creating a framework, that's it, and then we can move to other tasks assigned to us within the project. But as it turned out, creating this semantic framework for a project of such kind, and I will emphasize what the main challenges were, is not an easy endeavor. So in my part of the presentation, I will lead you, or just sort of summarize very briefly the different phases of our work. So defining what Chinese cultural heritage is, then content selection, creation of keywords, and I would say, just as a side note here, we use the keywords because This is our first experience for us working on such a topic, and that's why we kind of didn't take to the jargon you use here, vocabularies, thesauri, we just simply use the word keywords. Then linking this with existing thesauri and applying these keywords, validating them and refining them again. So what I want to show is how every following step that we took actually fed back into the previous work we did and helped us refine the semantic framework of the entire project. Next, please. So defining Chinese heritage in Europeana, how did we set out? How we started tackling this huge task. First, we looked at what is already labeled as China or Chinese in Europeana, and just a very simple search turned out, so with China as an entry word, turned out more than nearly 130,000 results. Obviously, many of them not necessarily related to China, because China itself, of course, can indicate any sort of porcelain. But anyway, we could already see that there's a lot of stuff in Europeana already that is linked to China. And the other question we asked was what kind of material do partners and associated partners hold in their collections? As it turned out, unfortunately, it was very diverse material. So unfortunately, from the point of the size of the task, it was not all cabbage. It was all very varied, as Antonella already hinted at in her part. Thank you. The next one, please. And here you can see a small slide, just a section of what we found in this, our initial search of Europeana, what kind of collections there are, just looking through the collections. And you could see that, for example, this Naturalia, natural history section is quite big, which we set aside. We did not deal with these things. We looked only at the cultural heritage items in the narrow sense of the word. Thank you. Next one. So obviously, we had to start creating a definition of what Chinese heritage might mean within our own project. Now, there were some sort of, let's say, theoretical issues that we had in our mind, at the back of our mind. First of all, that defining something as heritage or not as heritage is always a process of inclusion and exclusion. So something gets incorporated, something is given the value of heritage, and then there are things that are somehow left out. But of course, it's not also a question of what is heritage and what is not, but also whose heritage it is. So, I mean, the names might suggest that Chinese heritage in Europe means things that were brought from China to Europe, and that they were made in China, they were made by Chinese. But then again, there's already a question of who can be subsumed under this very broad name denominator Chinese. So there were a lot of political issues, sensitivity issues, and not just the ones related to colonialism or imperialist legacy that Antonella hinted at in her part, but also the question of how do we deal with the great cultural diversity within China? How do we deal with the issues is something that's been produced in Taiwan in post-Second World War time. Is it still Chinese or not? And so on. So we were trying to tackle all these delicate questions. And as I said, one of the issues was also, does it have to be does something has to be made in China in order to count as Chinese heritage in Europe? So, for example, would this is like a tapestry for very popular China rooms of the 17th, 18th century. Would this count as Chinese heritage in Europe or not? And we kind of broadened our definition or our name from Chinese heritage to Chinese and China related heritage in Europe. So what we concluded is that it's not only the things that were made in China or made by Chinese in accordance with Chinese tastes, preferences, and so on, but also the things that were made in China, but entirely for foreign markets, or the things that were made in Europe, but which tried to imitate Chinese styles, or which included ideas of China that people in Europe had at certain periods of time, that these are the items, these are the things that can fall under our category of Chinese heritage as well. So at one point we had even a query from our content providers. There's a commercial for noodles. It was not really Barilla, but it was one, I think, German brand of noodles. Would the commercial like that also fall under category? But here we drew a line. So for things we know were invented in China, but became so widespread that, you know, can now be produced anywhere, we said, no, this cannot count as Chinese heritage in Europe, although in the broadest sense, of course, it also testifies to these exchanges. So we came up with this sort of definition of China, Europe as a space of exchange. So not trying to look just at one point and the other point of this broad space, but looking at China and Europe as some sort of two interconnected entities with a very rich number of flows going between them, one way from both ways to and that the contexts that are, you know, intellectual, cultural, and of course trade, which might be the first thing we think of when we talk about exchange. So we kind of decided to use the concept of flows, which is a very common concept in anthropology, to indicate this sort of various types of exchanging and mixing and so on. And we said, okay, we will look at 3 different flows based on what is on the move. So one is the flow of objects, and this is maybe the most obvious one, but then also looking at the flow of people and the flow of ideas or practices, knowledge. And of course, these 3 flows are interconnected. For example, on the left-hand side, you see a couple, a Slovenian Austro-Hungarian officer who was interned in China, and his later wife, whom he met there, she was actually Japanese. And of course, they brought with them objects, but they also brought with them, back when they came back to Slovenia, they brought the ideas of what is beautiful, of what is of certain technological advancements, and so on. So we see that these 3 flows are interconnected, and we chose these flows in order to help us think about what kind of heritage items we might look at within our project. Next one, please. So this is, I'm not expecting you to read this, but just to give you the idea of what we came up with. So this is just a sort of a sketch, a scheme that might help, which we created in order to help the content providers involved in our project look through their collections and then choose their material based on this prompt, so to say. So we identified for some types of people who were moving between China and Europe. And here it's not just about Europeans in China, but also about Chinese in Europe. Then we were looking at the ideas, what sort of ideas and practices traveled from more perhaps intuitively art and architecture to cookery and so on, to religious practices. I mean, now we have obviously also practitioners of Qigong in Europe and so on. Yeah? And then, of course, based on these 2 flows, we identified number of types of objects that might fall under Chinese or China-related heritage in Europe. Next, please. And based obviously on this on these objects, we then went on to create keyword lists, or yeah, it was several lists. We were, first of all, of course, we relied on some already existing thesauri and vocabularies, in particular Getty's AAT. And of course, because we have a large photographic material within our collections, within the providers' collections, we also use the already existing photo vocabulary that Photo Consortium set up for a previous project. And then we also included our scenological expertise, and we were really limiting ourselves only to the types of objects that were predominant in the selection. So it was sort of a constant exchange between us as those who are creating this framework and the content providers looking through their collections and making a selection of the objects they might want to include. And we were then refining our lists based on that. Our keyword list, originally it was, what we proposed originally was over, it was nearly 3,000 words, but then we realized that this might be a little bit too much and that some of the terms are perhaps too expert to be really useful to the content providers. So we made a list of 700 words in addition to the already existing photo vocabulary. We created a very simple hierarchy by type, eventually really focusing on two of the more prominent types. So one is photography. This one already had. We only adopted the already existing list to Chinese material, so we added a couple of keywords and so on. But then we also created separate keywords for textiles and furniture, because that's quite well represented in some of the collections, and then ceramics, which again is another type of object that's above the average in terms of the share it has in the total number of items. So some of the challenges that we were facing were, first of all, that content providers had very different levels of expertise when it came to Chinese material. In fact, except for Slovene Ethnographic Museum, where they are helped by us, and Benaki Museum, which is also a specialized museum for East Asian ceramics and porcelain, we were the other content providers were actually non-experts and did not have assistance of experts at hand. Another challenge in creating keywords, and especially then applying these keywords, was also creating, it was also related to the way Chinese words are transcribed in different European languages. So next one, please. If you look at this slide here, it's a little bit small, sorry. You can see how we have a keyword in English first, then we've added Chinese simplified, Chinese traditional, so non-simplified characters and simplified characters. And then we were looking at what keywords were used in AAT and Wikidata. And later on, for the enrichment process, we have added, as you will see in a bit, we've added also other languages. Next one, please. Yes, this is one example. For example, a set of our keyword list for textiles. In the previous one, sorry, I didn't point out exactly, but it's also all very small. You might see that they were in the bottom. You have these different folders, which different sheets which relate to different types of objects. Yeah, next one. You can move one forward. Yeah, so this brings us already to linking our own keyword list with open data. Obviously, as I've mentioned already, we've linked it, and you could see in the previous example, we've linked it to AAT, which is very good because it also has some translations in other languages, including Chinese. And it's also good because it has a very reliable professional vocabulary, right? The terms, you can really rely on them. But there, for Chinese material, it has also some disadvantages. So, for example, periodization does not fit Chinese periodization. There are no place names, not even the biggest ones related to China. It doesn't have China-specific architectural terms and so on. Also, because it's obviously focused on art and architecture, it doesn't look at this more flow of people and flow of ideas part of our conceptual scheme. And we were also linking, as you could see, our keywords with Wikidata. And of course, Wikidata was very useful because we were able to create new entries for some of the keywords we really did not erase, and we did not want to omit from our list, but did not have any corresponding entries in AAT or Wikidata until that time. So next one, please. Just to briefly summarize the usefulness of particular vocabularies or thesauri of these two for China-related content. As I said, it is really it's made to professional standards and it has a very reliable terminology, but it's lacking some of the terms we consider basic maybe when it comes to China. And for Wikidata, of course, the disadvantage is that the quality of the entries is not necessarily good. And even with some of the existing entries, we had to do some revisions. But the good thing is that you can create new entries. And of course, you don't just create a new keyword there, but you can link it with, through statements, you link it with already existing entries and so on. And therefore, you can create a much richer semantic network. Next one, please. And here is just an example of what eventually, when we prepared our keyword list for use in automatic enrichment, what eventually it looked like. We have, you know, we looked through all the languages that were used in our collections, or some were even richer than that. And or the languages that are used in Europeana, we added Chinese characters, as you could see, and then the links. And this was one particular keyword, but we had eventually several, more than 1,000 keywords with this sort of structure. Yeah. And we use these keywords then in two ways. So the content providers were given these keywords in advance, and I'm not sure to what extent they have been able to apply them. But we did use these extensive keyword lists into enrichment processes that were also already mentioned by Antonella, and that is the automatic enrichment and in the crowdsourced annotation. So let's look at the automatic enrichment first. So we use this, as I said, original keyword list, including and then PhotoVocabulary, plus we added some people and places which we didn't actually list earlier, because in Europeana, people and places can be used automatically to create entities, as far as we were told. So we applied the keyword list to the following EDM fields: creator, description, subject, title, and spatial. And of course, this went through the process of validation. And after, in the process of validation, it turned out that some of the keywords were not suitable, or that they could be put to a better use. And that's why we've created 150 more new entries that we sort of, in the validation process, found to be missing, and another 44 entries for annotation by deduction. I will give you an example of that in a second. So all in all, after the validation, we had more than 12,000 items enriched through this process. Next one, please. Just to give you an example of a refinement by deduction, for example, we had a keyword list, a keyword called export ceramics, which is a general term referred to ceramics produced in China, but exclusively for export to foreign markets, basically to Europe, and later to the US. But we noticed that some of the material that was being enriched is also using the trade ceramics term. So through the validation, we were able to then just, you know, equate these two terms. Or for example, Batavia brown, that's a type of porcelain known for its brown color, which was typical for export ceramics. We were able to then enrich all the entries which had Batavia brown in the validation process as export ceramics or as chinoiserie, because as I said, this was all made for foreign markets. Next one, please. We also applied our keyword list to crowdsourced annotation. But then based on the selection of objects that were being annotated in a particular campaign, we also added new keyword lists, thus enriching the annotation possibilities. And the next one, please. For example, we realized that while we did create keyword list for entries as for example, legations in China, so the extraterritorial properties that foreign powers held. We did not have one uniform term for Europeans in China, and that's what we added, for example. Or when we saw that there's more coins for a crowdsourced annotation, we added certain coin-related vocabulary. And here I should emphasize that this was also possible because we had university students from sinology department, from Asian studies department, from sinology doing this annotation, because maybe for non-experts this added vocabulary might not be of much use. Okay, and now my final slide. So hopefully through this presentation, I was able to show you how creating a semantic background for such a project is really a process. How at each stage you check whether what you've done is suitable, you find the missing pieces, you find some sort of places for improvement, and you go back and you are able to actually implement an improved version of this, let's say, keyword list or of the scheme in broader sense. And I guess although our basics semantic scheme is already available at PAGODE Europeana China website, I think that the really final version of our semantic framework will only be available after we conclude this project. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Maya. I will take your very enlightening explanation about your work process just one step further by stressing the outcomes of what basically originated in this semantic background work. As Maya already hinted at, it was from the very first stage, even from stage 0, that the semantic framework came into play in PAGODE during the content selection phase. So our partners, our main partners, Kikirpa and United Archives, have huge collections of digital cultural heritage records. And of course, the big question was what to pick for ingestion and publication in the framework of PAGODE. So definitely the story about the flows of people, objects, and ideas, and the whole reasoning behind it, plus the specific examples singled out by Maya and her team, definitely came into play when partners were singling out those groups of items to supply to Europeana. So they had a better relevance, I would say. They were helped in making a selection more efficiently. And we also improved the complementarity of our collections by taking into account what was there in Europeana already and looking at what partners could add to that, enriching, so to speak, the Chinese and China related heritage showcase that we were building for Europeana. What we also did was use that semantic background work to make sure that from the very beginning, from the source, the metadata supplied to the newly digitized collections were strong. And we all know that strong metadata are key, not only to, after publication in Europeana, find your materials to help users really retrieve and search for specific items, but also to reuse it in creative work such as curated editorials. So we were able to help our content providers who, as Maya said, were in most cases not specialized in Chinese heritage to adequately metadate their collections. Therefore, I believe that we truly added value on their side as well, because this kind of attached information to their records that probably would have never been there outside of or without a project such as PAGODE. We also helped feeding the Europeana algorithm with exactly the terms or the keywords that we chose to feed them with. And this will come back when I talk about the thematic collection. Let me first go to metadata enrichment. I will touch very briefly upon this because I think Maya explained it well, that different keyword lists were made towards different goals in this project. And one of them was to exactly allow the NLP techniques and the AI processes to apply keywords to specific records and thereby clean the metadata, link the metadata, and make them multilingual. As we are taking a hybrid approach to enriching metadata in PAGODE, we also implemented precise that 3 crowdsourcing campaigns. We have 2 that are closing down as we speak and 1 that will run over the summer. And here we manually annotate digital records by choosing keywords from a thesaurus. And you can guess by now, the thesaurus is compiled by established thesauri, such as the photography one, such as the fashion one, and such as the Getty one, but also by the work carried out by the Ljubljana team. We kind of had our NTUA team, so our technical team in Athens, use those keywords to feed our crowdsourcing campaign on Crowd Heritage platform. You can see here a first campaign that was concluded successfully with 100%, more than 100% of our targeted amount of annotations achieved. You can see that we curated some photographic collections to be described by the people taking part in this campaign. And we made sure to not only use partner or associate partner content, but also other open collections already present in Europeana. So for instance, the second campaign that you see, or the second selection that you see here with pictures from Wolfgang Schröter, please go and check them out. It's also a fantastic photo set by Deutsche Photothek. It's all open content, and this is the kind of collection that we definitely didn't want to keep out of PAGODE project. We wanted to be as inclusive as possible for these gems of China and China-related heritage in Europeana. This is what happens when you go into one of those photo sets. You pick a picture, you're able to start typing a term. The term will then check back from the keyword lists and the thesauri provided. And if you're not able to think of something yourself, you can upvote or downvote tags that are already there. Voila, so you add to the metadata list, and in the end, everything gets fed back to Europeana through the annotation API and enriches the story, in fact, that these records tell when they are shown in the Europeana platform. We are almost closing down this artifacts campaign. I thought it was worth of showing you this because the types of records and of objects are very, very different. And as Maya explained, this required a more specialized knowledge. You can see that we have here amulets, we have objects for daily use, for devotional practices, and so on. You definitely need different types of keywords to be able to describe objects such as these in a relevant way. And so this is what the semantic team too applied themselves to. And then finally, I wanted to, because I'm conscious of time, I wanted to tell you 2 minutes about how the semantic work fed into the curatorial practice. It really provided me with a background to interpret the metadata that were created and that were enriched into engaging storytelling, because in the end, we want people to find our Chinese content in Europeana, and we want people to get as excited basically as we are and as passionate as we are, even as non-specialists. So we are growing richer in knowledge and experience every single day in this project, and the semantic background really fed us a lot of that knowledge. For me personally, it would have been extremely difficult to embark upon storytelling without this basic layer, this foundation of reasoning and of information. And it allowed me so far to create, I think we are at 31 editorials, where we where we really practice layered storytelling so that different kinds of audiences are able to enjoy what we are doing. All of those editorials have been brought together in a dedicated China hub. We used to call it the thematic collection on Chinese heritage, but it's more like a feature page where you find together every single thing that we've done in Pagode so far, and it will keep on growing. Just to be clear, over the next few months, we're expecting this showcase to become even more brilliant. More blogs will be published, more galleries with beautiful pictures from new collections, existing collections, and browse entry points that take you right into the content. Again, new content such as this one, the Carl Simon collection of United Archives, but also existing content. And again, I couldn't hide my love for this photographer, Wolfgang Schröter, represented here by Deutsche Fotothek. We keep on building this thematic collection also from the inside out. You all know, I think, that Europeana collections environment now operates on entities. Well, of course, the keywords that the semantic team created, they are going to help feeding those entities. So entities are going to emerge from the huge amount of Chinese records in Europeana, and they will allow us to cluster the content around certain concepts that help users discover collections that otherwise they probably would not find on their own. And this is the story we wanted to tell you today. It's a huge value chain here that we were able to deploy through all the partners, of course, in the Pagode project, but also with Photo Consortium kind of being a liaison, not a liaison dangereuse, but a liaison that was very profitable for everybody involved in the project, between the research team focusing on semantics, the content providers, the metadata specialists, myself as a curator, Europeana, of course, and its end users. I am afraid not a lot of time is left for the Q&A. In fact, probably nothing at all, but I'm happy to hand over to Antonella for perhaps a few closing words. And if there's any pressing questions that I missed in the Q&A, Antonella, also please feel free to pick them up.